Imagine if your next fancy scarf was spun not by humble silkworms, but by fire-breathing dragon worms. Luxury with a built-in flamethrower. Picture dragon-woven ties that double as emergency heat sources, or silk pajamas with a crispy finish. Warning, may crackle on contact. But credit where credit's not due. This myth of magical, dragon-esque silk spinners was ancient Chinese PR at its finest, centuries in advance of today's clickbait gurus. Back then, people genuinely believed silk's shimmering sheen had to come from something supernatural. Earthworms on steroids, or dragons moonlighting on Etsy. Here's the real trick. For thousands of years, the secret of turning boring caterpillar cast-offs into imperial bling was guarded tighter than Grandma's cookie recipe, minus the sweet treats, plus a dash of international espionage. Foreign merchants gawped at silk imports along the Silk Road, conjuring ever more extravagant origin stories. Because when you realize you're draped in garments spun by gooey larvae, denial becomes as natural as stretching after a nap. Meet the real star, Bombyx mori, a worm whose superpower is vacuuming mulberry leaves like a leafy hoover. No fiery breath, no wings, just relentless munching and serious cocoon crafting skills. The only thing dragon worms ever scorched was the reputation of medieval zoologists. If dragons really spun silk, the label would come with a warning. May cause minor singeing and skyrocketing castle insurance premiums. As silk thread snaked westward, the mysterious veil remained, fueling rumors and cloak-and-dagger espionage. Move over, Tolkien. Original fantasy creatures wore silk and napped a lot. Eventually, the caterpillar was out of the bag, and out of the cocoon. As much as we love a good legend, it's not dragons but diligent, chubby larvae who deserve the applause. Yet the myth lives on, proving humans adore wrapping reality in fabric as fanciful as the silk itself. Just as the magical dragon worms produced precious silk, mythical griffins guarded treasured relics like the Golden Fleece in distant Central Asia. Imagine trekking through Central Asia, your heart set on sparkling riches, only to be waylaid by a battalion of winged, fire-breathing lion-eagle hybrids. Welcome to Griffin country. In ancient myth, the famous Golden Fleece, yes, that glitzy sheep's hide, wasn't guarded by some dozing sheepdog. Nope, it was fiercely protected by griffins. Eagle-headed, lion-bodied, taloned terrors with absolutely zero patience for trespassers or wool thieves. Why park this legendary sheep sanctuary in Central Asia? Because the Greeks, ever the adventurous traders, traveled the Silk Road. As they ventured east, picking up silk, spices, and tall tales, they encountered all kinds of strange sights. Some real, camels, wild horses, others a bit more mythical, giant bird-lion hybrids apparently. Traders returned with stories of mysterious bones scattered across the steppes. The buzzkill? Modern archaeologists reckon those griffin relics were just dinosaur fossils, not exactly the winged apex predators the Greeks imagined. And the Golden Fleece itself? Spoiler alert, scholars believe it referred to river miners using sheep's wool to catch flecks of gold, not magical animals with a taste for mutton. Less glamorous, sure, but way more believable than trying to shear a griffin. Today, griffins have swapped gold guarding for cushier gigs as college mascots and fantasy novel cover stars. Forget centuries-old sheep hides. If your fleece goes missing nowadays, blame your own lax home security. Because seriously, who settles for a poodle when you could have a winged apex predator on patrol? Beyond the guarded treasures of Central Asia, travelers sought a legendary spring along the Silk Road, believed to grant eternal youth. Imagine risking life and limb on camelback just for a sip of agelessness. Sandstorms, bandits, and questionable campfire cuisine aside, ancient travelers along the Silk Road weren't merely schlepping silk and spices. Many chased a hope wilder than their beards, secret springs rumored to grant immortality. These weren't your garden-variety watering holes. Legend spoke of enchanted waters that could rejuvenate you, at least between bouts of traveler's dysentery. The myth sparkled through scrolls and stories, oases bubbling with magic where the old sprang sprightly back to life, and the young, well, just stayed young, presumably forever. If eternal youth was a travel perk, Expedia might as well start selling time machines. Spoiler alert, The Silk Road was less a passport to Peter Pan and more a complicated highway of commerce. Camel caravans lugged bolts of silk, not bottles of miraculous mineral water. So if you're picturing Silk Road spa days and wrinkle-reversing refreshments, let's reel it in. Most reports of these mystical waters likely came from oases with unusually mineral-rich springs. Yes, in a desert, even slightly funky-tasting water counts as magical, and gossip travels faster than a merchant at closing time. What these miraculous springs really offered was reliable hydration, excellent for desert survival, less so for skipping Botox appointments. Call it disappointment or just good science, but nobody on the Silk Road actually scored eternal youth. If they did, they're keeping suspiciously quiet, perhaps busy running wellness retreats in disguise. Today, the closest thing to a magic spring is an Instagram filter, and youthful looks owe more to SPF than supernatural springs. The real elixir: sunscreen, salads, and if you're lucky, travel-sized cosmetics, courtesy of the Silk Road. Near these fabled waters, tales arose of enormous birds collecting valuable cinnamon across Arabia and India. Imagine a world where your morning cinnamon toast arrives courtesy of a giant, feathery courier. From Arabia, no less. You waltz into the kitchen, and instead of the coffee maker sputtering to life, a massive bird swoops in, drops a spice-laden twig on your plate, nods wisely, and flaps off to tackle its next breakfast delivery. Why did this gargantuan bird set up shop in Arabia? Because its cinnamon rolls were legendary and flightless. The ancient Greeks dreamed up tales just like this. To them, colossal birds, basically prehistoric avian FedEx, snatched cinnamon sticks from secret cliffside nests. Legend had it that clever Arab traders tempted these behemoths down with chunks of meat, then swiped the prized cinnamon while the birds munched away. If only cinnamon really fell from the sky, breakfast would never be boring again. Here's the sticky truth. Cinnamon doesn't come from bird-flattened forests or cloud-high perches. It comes from tree bark. Plain and simple. No wings, no nests, no avian heists required. So why invent these bird-brained stories? Because the real spice trade was cutthroat. To keep nosy Greeks and Romans guessing, Arab merchants spun these sky-high yarns and guarded cinnamon's origins tighter than Grandma's secret cookie recipe. What does this myth teach us? Humans will climb dizzying heights, sometimes literally in their stories, for just a pinch of spice. Not that anyone ever asked for a giant bird to deliver kale, but hey, priorities. Cinnamon's true journey was all sweat, sea voyages, and savvy traders, not soaring wings and feathery drop-offs. So next time you savor that cinnamon roll, tip your hat not to a giant bird, but to the epic lengths people went to keep your breakfast delicious. Far from these exotic lands, Alexander the Great erected a mighty wall to protect his realm from northern tribes and mystical creatures. Picture Alexander the Great, military mastermind, culture shaper, and, if legends are to be believed, part-time ancient handyman. Not only did he trample Persian armies, but he apparently moonlighted as a DIY contractor, commissioning a monster-proof megawall in the wild north to keep out barbarian hordes, and because why not, the occasional fire-breathing dragon. Let's storm through this tall tale like a Macedonian phalanx. Medieval texts spin yarns about Alexander's Wall, or the Gates of Alexander. Think Hadrian's Wall meets Game of Thrones, but with more monsters and fewer selfie sticks. These stories blend a sprinkle of truth with a heaping scoop of fantasy, giving bored scribes a front-row seat to Alexander not just conquering armies, but also sealing off looming apocalypses. Here's the cold, uncarved stone reality. Alexander spent more time besieging cities than laying bricks on misty frontiers. No credible archaeology team has ever dug up a megawall credited to our Macedonian maestro. Masonry glory was left to Hadrian. Alexander's resume stays firmly commander-focused. And let's face it, master wall builder isn't exactly an official LinkedIn skill. The mix-up likely comes from later dynasties like the industrious Sassanids, who built real fortifications and shamelessly borrowed a sprinkle of Alexander's legendary swagger. Medieval storytellers then tossed in dragons, doom-laden tribes, and monster-proof architecture, because, back then, history was best served with a side of spice. So yes, Alexander faced many monsters, mostly rival kings and surly elephants, but he wasn't quietly covert on any Westerosi construction project. If he'd walled off every scary rumor, we'd all be lost in a stone maze. Sorry, Middle Ages. Conquering, not wall building, was truly Alexander's claim to fame. In the vast expanse beyond the wall, the footprints of Buddha were said to be scattered throughout Central Asia, inspiring countless travelers. Ever wonder why ancient travelers in Central Asia kept stumbling over footprints that didn't match anyone's shoe size? No, it wasn't a secret centipede convention. It was Buddhism, striding across borders with all the subtlety of a yak caravan on a caffeine high. Now let's debunk that old classroom fable. Buddha's travels were strictly a local gig in ancient India, confined to the Ganges Valley, as if enlightenment needed a visa stamped at every river crossing. Nice story, but history laughs at passport control. While Siddhartha himself never swapped his sandals for snow boots, his teachings racked up more frequent flyer miles than a royal envoy. From Afghanistan's windswept deserts to the bustling bazaars of Xinjiang, Buddhism spread like a medieval cologne sale, spiritually intoxicating and impossible to avoid. Caravan merchants along the Silk Road were just as likely to haul Buddha statuettes as they were princesses' silks or spicy gossip. Monasteries popped up beside every oasis, turning dusty pit stops into full-blown meditation hubs. Local kings, ever eager to bank cosmic karma points, commissioned Buddha statues towering higher than their egos and their palaces for the Triple Crown: spiritual merit, tourism boost, and bragging rights that echoed through the ages. Even the horse-riding nomads, known for lightning raids and zero chill, couldn't resist some mental floss between battles. When mounted archers pause for a quick Zen moment, you know your philosophy's reached meme-level cultural virality. Centuries later, archaeologists unearthed the receipts: ruined monasteries, glowing wall art, and ancient inscriptions. Proof positive that Buddha's teachings frolicked across Central Asia, leaving marks far dustier and way more profound than a footnote in history. Amid these sacred sites, sightings of unicorns were commonly reported along the bustling trade routes of the Silk Road. Unicorns, not just fairy tale fluff and glittery notebooks, but apparently the original travel influencers of the Silk Road. Move over, Marco Polo. Your blog lacked sparkle content. Legend has it, weary merchants desperate to jazz up grain shipments with some flair tossed unicorn sightings into their trade reports. Rubies? Obviously. Spices? Naturally. But did I mention the unicorn who winked at me outside Samarkand? Suddenly, everyone perked up. Before we judge these merchants for their creative licensing, remember, no Instagram filters or 20/20 hindsight existed yet. Early explorers, slogging through exotic lands after days of bartering and mild dehydration, swore they spotted unicorns. Usually, though, it was the Indian rhinoceros, a single-horned beast with questionable grooming standards and a thick hide. But hey, when your only reference is a doodle and a legend, who's to say a rhino isn't just a unicorn having a bad hair day? Chinese and Persian texts ooze awe, or sometimes dread, for these single-horned wonders. Appear at the right moment, and you'd score some serious luck. Show up when you're hangry, and they'd supposedly curse your tuna sandwich. These stories zipped along the Silk Road almost as fast as bolts of silk, stoking centuries of horn envy and cross-cultural curiosity. Maps and pottery from the era, drenched in unicorn cameos. Apparently, even geography needed a dash of fabulous. Of course, despite countless reported sightings, not a single credible unicorn selfie survived, turning these mythical mascots into less travel buddies and more ongoing punchlines. Who knew the Silk Road ran on silk, spices, and a hefty sprinkle of imagination? Further along these mystical paths lay the land of Serinda, home to a sleeping beauty destined to awaken and bring a new utopia. Whispers from ancient maps tell of Serinda, not a forgotten IKEA shelf, mind you, but a land cradling a princess whose nap could put Sleeping Beauty's slumber to shame. Somewhere along the wind-whipped spines of Asia, legend says a miracle worker snoozed, destined to awaken and sprinkle utopia like a contestant in a glitter commercial. Apparently, the fairy tale HR handbook mandates napping through entire eras to secure that gig. So who's buying into this mystical snooze fest? Pop culture, for starters. Storytellers pin Serinda as ground zero for a dormant beauty bringer, curled up and ready to turn the Silk Road into the Sparkle Highway. But don't let your GPS send you astray. Serinda wasn't some fairy tale kingdom. Nestled smack between China and India, it was a bustling crossroads on the Silk Road, where empires linked arms, traders hustled, and mingling got as unpredictable as a wedding buffet. Now about that ever-popular tale of the sleeping maiden. It's a charming bedtime story, but actual evidence for a princess in stasis. Zilch. Unless you count a handful of mummified nobles who, while impressively preserved, bring more historical dust than Disney magic. If this beauty ever stirred, she'd probably trip over centuries of trade receipts, not royal robes. Here's the kicker. All those blessings fairy tales promise didn't spring from enchanted naps or fairy godmothers. Serinda's real magic wand was a killer loom. Commerce, caravans, and culture, not dozing princesses, wove its golden age. Myths flourish where travelers swap stories and merchants barter silks. So it's no surprise Serinda became fertile ground for fantasy. In the end, Serinda's true beauty wasn't an immortal princess, but people skilled enough to weave dreams and silk with equal flair. The only prince likely to kiss anyone awake? A bored merchant hoping for a better deal.